Okay, welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch. I'm director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and welcome to our series of empathy circles with empathy activists. And when I mean empathy activists, I mean people who are working intensely on the topic of empathy, trying to promote it, who are teachers, trainers, have all kinds of different activities that they're doing. I have done books. A couple of people here have done books on the topic. So what we're trying to do is have an empathy circle here going for 2 hours on the topic of how might we build the empathy movement. And the intention here is for empathy activists to get together, to meet each other, to start dialoguing more and make connections, hopefully be able to do different projects together in the future. And I want to start off with just having everyone introduce themselves, just take 1 minute, your name, your location, a website, or just anything you want to say for about a minute about yourself and your empathy work. I'll just model it. Like I said, I'm Edwin Rutsch, director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. I've been working for 14 years on the topic of empathy, how to create a more empathic society. We have a lot of different projects, trainings, empathy tent that goes out and offers listening to the public, and just have a process, this empathy circle process that's kind of the core of what we're doing. So that's me. So I'll just go around and call on the others. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, and my website, cultureofempathy.com and empathicircle.com. Maria?
I'm Maria Ross. I am a speaker and an author and a brand strategist committed to building leaders, cultures, and brands infused with empathy for more success, and trying to really convince people that empathy is a competitive advantage. It's not only good for the world, it's good for business. And my website is red-slice.com, and we'll be undergoing a big transition in the next few months.
And you have a book out on empathy as well.
And I have a
What's
book
the
on
name
empathy
again?
called The Empathy Edge, Harnessing the Value of Compassion as an Engine for Success. And it's meant to be the business case for embracing empathy in the world of business.
Great, thanks. Alicia?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Alicia Kae Miller, empathy activist and founder of Empathy Uprise. I'm based in Austin, Texas, on a mission to shift humanity from me to we, through speaking, seminar, and training, and shining a light. Can I say that again, Edwin? Are you going to edit?
Go
this
ahead.
out?
No editing here. This is free.
Oh, you guys,
edit free. Tell it like
right.
it is.
You guys. I'm so used to recording and we edit that out. But anyway, one more time. Alicia Kae Miller, empathy activist and founder of Empathy Uprise, based in Austin, Texas. And I am on a mission to shift humanity from me to we by encouraging all of us to be empathy activists in our lives and our work and communities. And I do this through speaking, seminar, and training. And I launched in 2020, and my website is empathyuprise.com.
Great, thank you. Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Volpe. I'm the CEO and founder of Ignite 360, which is an insight strategy and training firm. I'm also an empathy activist and author of Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time, which is focused on helping people understand empathy and how to actually practice empathy and get over the barriers that they have.
Oh, great. I feel like I'm in heaven here.
Oh, let me mention my websites. Let me mention my website. So you can go to the number 5 steps-to-empathy.com is one of the websites. So 5 steps-to-empathy.com, and then also ignite-360.com is my agency's website.
Great, thanks for
And
that.
I should mention,
all those links will be in the description too.
Yeah, I should mention, I always forget, I host a podcast called The Empathy Edge. So
Yes.
that is conversations with leaders, C-suite, best-selling authors like Rob, who are trying to further a culture of empathy. Edwin was on,
Yeah,
Yes.
all those links will be down below too. Go ahead, Alicia.
Oh, good. Well, I was going to add on too, I have a monthly video cast series, And I have also had Rob and Edwin on the show called Solidarists.
Great. So what we're
Oh,
going to
and,
do
and you
is,
know what, Edwin? You
Yeah.
know what? Rob, you didn't mention where you're from, Rob, or did you? Did I not hear it?
I might not have mentioned I'm in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area as well.
Yes,
too.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right. Okay. Enough. I'm the
okay, yeah.
outlier here.
Yeah, so we're going to be using the empathy circle process. I find that the empathy circle is one of the best first step gateway practices, just a really foundational empathy building skill. The topic is how might we build the empathy movement or whatever's alive for you. So you can say whatever's on your mind, on your heart, and just share that. We're going to be having 5-minute turns. So we'll have a speaker, and then they'll select their listener, and then you'll share an idea or two, which is half a minute to 45 seconds. You pause, you get a reflection from your listener who reflects back what they understand that you're saying, to sort of the meaning, the essence of what you're saying. You check, did they get it correctly? If so, you continue. If they didn't, you can say it again in different words. I'll keep time. We'll have 5-minute turns, and I'll hold this up when the time is up, and you'll just kind of wrap up what you're saying within a sentence. And then at that point, whoever was the listener becomes the speaker, and they select who they're going to speak to. And we kind of do that process, and we'll just go for the full almost an hour and a half or so, and then we'll a little bit more, and then we'll have about a 10-minute just sort of a quick debrief at the end. And so our topic, how do we build the empathy movement? And I'll be the first listener just to model it. Who would like to get started? And if you're kind of going on, if the speaker is saying a lot and you're thinking, oh, I'll never be able to stop. I mean, I'll never be able to reflect all that. You can ask for them to pause. So otherwise and I might even do a little reminder to pause. So a little sign here, just to remind you to pause, to give your listener a chance to reflect what they're saying. So I'll be the first listener who would like to talk on the topic. I'm listening.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Someone's got to be sacrificed.
Yeah.
All right, so the empathy movement. As Alicia was saying earlier, it's very daunting. Many of us are out there speaking and training and talking to people about empathy. And Alicia hit the nail on the head that my biggest concern is that this is just a flash in the pan because of the pandemic. I hope that's not the case, but I'm worried that it will fall out of favor for the next workplace trend. And I'll pause there.
Okay, yeah. So I'm hearing you were kind of picking up what Alicia said about it's kind of daunting, this empathy work and movement, and you have some real concern that it's just a fad, that as soon as the pandemic's over, it's just going to be over with, kind of the interest in it.
Yeah. I think once we address the trends of, quiet quitting and the Great Resignation, my hope is that people embrace this as a new leadership paradigm, to replace an outdated paradigm of command and control, of not bringing your emotions to work. So I think that's part of the conversation, is that we need to acknowledge for people that it's a transformation and that we're going from A to B, and we don't want to go back.
So you're really wanting to let people know that this is a transformation. It's going from a power over top-down approach to a different empathic approach, and maybe trying to say it's not just some fad or something, that there's really a deeper something happening here.
Yeah. And I think what's been effective in my talks, and I'm sure, both of you, everyone on this call is doing this, is to really bust the myths of what empathetic leadership means, because people do have a perception that empathy is just giving people what they want, or it's just being nice. And that leaves no room for, boundaries, standards, consequences. And someone said it best on a conversation I was on before, where they said you can't have empathy without empathy has to go hand in hand with accountability, that you don't give up accountability in order to be empathetic.
So it's the sort of a barrier you're seeing is sort of notions of what empathy is. It's just being nice or being acquiescent to other people. And you're saying that there's other things that it's really about. And it seems like the core is mutual responsibility. There's a aspect.
Absolutely. And I feel when you communicate that and you educate people on what empathy actually means, and more importantly, what it looks like, that's how we're going to sort of win the war, is because they breathe a sigh of relief when they realize, you know, like with your work, Edwin, they don't have to agree with someone to be empathetic. They just need to try to find common ground and appreciate common humanity and understand someone's context, but also use that information to move forward in perhaps a slightly different way than you were going to had you not had that perspective or had that person's point of view.
So you're saying that if people really understand what empathy means, it's just not agreeing with them, that there's something deeper there, that once they see the mutual responsibility and what it really is, that they'll be more accepting, appreciative of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been effective to show people the data and the research and make the business case that it can lead to success. Because again, we need to change people's definition of what it means to get to success. And so when you show them that success is possible by operating with empathy, just as much as if you operate by being a jerk or not caring what other people think, I think that's where I'm seeing people be able to make the shift. And I think a lot of them are, like I said, appreciative of that they can actually, I don't have to be a completely different person and forget my values when I go to work.
So it's about showing people sort of maybe the practicality of it. This really works, and you just have to be able to explain that so that they can understand it. And it's not about you just acquiescing, giving up all your values. It's really there's something deeper here, and that was the time to. So.
I feel heard. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'll speak to, let me reset the time. I'll speak to Alicia then, if you want to reflect.
Well, so Edwin, I'm assuming, because I actually want to follow on to what Maria, perhaps.
Okay, the first thing you do is just reflect back. So I get 5 minutes now to speak. I'm going to speak in a little chunk, and you're just going to reflect back what you hear and understand that I said. And then when it's your turn afterwards, you'll be able to say anything that you want.
Okay, so because I do want to follow on what Maria said.
You will when it's your turn.
Oh, yeah. I got it.
That's how it works.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
All right.
So right now I have like a 5-minute chunk to speak, and all you're doing is reflecting back your understanding of what I'm saying. So I will say I agree that the aspect of mutual responsibility is central to empathy, and a lot of people don't realize that. So I'm kind of, so you just want to reflect back what you heard me say, Alicia?
You mean just now?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry. Hold on. Sorry, you guys. See, this is good though. This is a great exercise in all of this, right? So that the notion of central, it's not about, we don't have to all agree, but we do have to come to the common table of commonality and reflect
mutual responsibility. That's about mutual responsibility.
Right, on both sides. It's not a one-sided conversation.
Right. And that I think that the empathy circle models that mutual responsibility, because everyone in the empathy circle is responsible for listening to the other person.
So what I'm hearing is that you're suggesting the empathy circle models that behavior because it's beholden on everyone in the circle to listen to what every single person says and be able ideally to reiterate that back.
Exactly. And everyone feels heard to their satisfaction, right? You get responsibility to listen to other people to their satisfaction, and you get heard to your satisfaction.
Right. Right. It all comes down to satisfaction, right? So the other person's their needs are being met as well as your needs are being met.
Or being listened to, yeah, being heard.
Right.
So in the empathy work that I do, a lot of people come to the circle, so say, I empathize with everybody in my family, but nobody listens to me. And I hear that over and over again. They think that that's what empathy is I do all the listening for everyone else. And that's not what I mean by empathy.
No, and it ties into what you and I were just exchanging previously. It's not a one-way conversation. It's very much a two-way street, and it's not about a dump on one person or another. And I think that's what, no, sorry.
Yeah.
Correcting myself. I'm sorry, you guys.
So, and the empathy circle is a really good practice for that. It's like, you bring it into your family, like in my family, like, nobody listens, right? It's like, but you bring it into the family, everybody has to listen to everybody else. So it shifts the whole dynamic versus one person sort of controlling the conversation. Yeah.
So in your family, it's a matter of exchange of conversation. And so that really does shift the overall dynamic. There is not one dominant voice.
And it's also very effective for conflict mediation. Like, when we do mediation, you bring people who are in conflict into this empathy circle practice, and it's almost like a miracle, magic, like how the conflict starts unknotting itself when people can start hearing each other.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that when people truly, truly listen to learn from one another, we can untangle these knots that don't necessarily have to be there, but without conversation that we find ourselves in.
And then the next part, yes, and then the next part is, how do we get this out in society? I mean, we're really going against the grain. The society is so geared to sort of anti-empathy sort of values. There's a lot of empathy there, but there's also a lot that's, sort of blocks to it. So it is, I'm really excited to kind of talk about those more here in this discussion.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, because it definitely there's a misunderstanding toward it, what it is. And so, your idea is like, how do we get this out there? Because we really only we can only win, but we essentially have to lose, meaning we have to step back and hear one another in that two-way conversation.
Yeah, I feel fully heard, so you can select your listener.
Sure, sure. Okay, so you guys, if we can just pause. So at this point, I wanted to circle back on what Maria's, when she mentioned to me, it mentioned about.
You can do that with your listener.
Yeah.
And do that with your
maybe
listener.
Select Rob and say anything. This is total free
Rob.
speech.
Yeah, you guys up. See, I'm learning.
Alicia, have you done the empathy circle training?
No, it's the
okay.
first time. Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
So you guys, I'm a novice here.
No worries. We
You're
should have been empathetic and reviewed the ground rules with you first. So apologies.
Yes. So Rob, and I'm going to be clumsy here, which is okay. You know what? Sometimes, conversation is clumsy. So Rob, when Maria started our conversation, she mentioned how I suggested that how daunting this empathy work is. And then she further went on to say about how, and this is what I heard, she heard me say that it's a fad. And what I wanted to clarify was the work in and of itself, being an empathy activist, doing the work that we do is daunting because there's a lot of embracing, but there's a lot of, and I feel like it's the unknowing, unknowing, what people don't understand what empathy is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other aspect is the, someone said to me over coffee, Alicia, you got to capitalize on this empathy thing now because it's fat. I don't agree with that.
Take a pause.
So
let me-
Take
so
a
let me-
pause.
let
Let
me-
me reflect
I'm
back.
sorry, I'm sorry.
So let me reflect back what
Yes,
you were saying.
sorry,
Let me know.
guys.
No, it's all good. Let me know if I got this right. So,
Yes.
you were reflecting on what Maria had said and the idea that, and her concern that it's a fad.
Yes.
And this is, and as she had said, it's a workplace trend and the next thing is going to come along. And your view, though, is that this is ongoing work and things that we have to continue to do. And yet you had somebody recently say to you over a coffee, like, Alicia, you got to capitalize on this right now, this fad of empathy. Is that kind of accurate?
That is spot on. And so I will just say in there, Rob, that I'm not so keen on the Webster Merriam definition of empathy because it gives really people a choice from my perspective. So I tell people, I said, Alicia's perspective, to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. You don't have to agree with me, but you need to know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so you've got a disagreement with Merriam-Webster dictionary and the choices that they give, where your definition of empathy is to be seen, to be heard, to be understood.
Yep, exactly. Cool. And the reason that I feel that that component is because you don't have to agree with me, but you need to know where I'm coming from. Understand that aspect. Yes, spot on.
Yes.
Thank you,
okay.
sir. Yes. Do I keep going, Edwin?
You can keep going. I think you've got time.
You've got about 3 minutes left.
3 minutes. 3 minutes. Okay, so we clarified. So going back to empathy being a fad, it's given what I just said, you guys, from my perspective, to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. That is something that not just one segment of society wants, right? We all want it. So it is something that is so vast and huge. And I feel that when people realize what empathy is, it's not sympathy, it's not pity, they can lean more closely into it.
Yeah, so what I was hearing you say was that empathy is something that is universally desired.
Yes.
But people need to understand that it isn't sympathy, it isn't about pity, right, but that it's something we can all benefit from.
Exactly. Yes. Woohoo! Oh, Edwin.
If you have nothing else to say, you can say, I feel fully heard, or you still have a couple minutes if you want to keep going.
I feel fully heard.
Awesome. So I guess it's my turn. We'll let Maria listen because this is her first. Yeah. So yeah, building on all of that, it can feel like a daunting task. I take comfort in the fact that there are many of us, and I feel honored to have connected with so many people. And we're as Ashok Bhattacharya said to me last week, we got together and he said, there are many of us pushing the same wave, and we're all pushing this big wave in a one direction. We all are doing it differently, as we all have our different sort of areas of coming at it and angles and aspects. And I felt like that was really insightful on his part. So I'll pause there.
So what I hear you saying is that you take comfort in the fact that there's so many people involved in this movement, and that you were talking to someone the other day who said we're all rowing the same wave, and that momentum will hopefully make this be something that actually creates change.
Correct. We're all pushing the same way.
We're all pushing the same way.
Yeah. Yes. And yes, correct. And what I think where I see the challenge, or I guess the thing that I question is, are we all, there are people that are very empathetically minded or interested in the topic, and that's great. We're building an army, if you would, of people that have better empathy skills, they have better understanding and knowledge of it. It's that next group, though, that needs to wake up to what's actually going on, and how do we effectively reach them so that we can inform and challenge for them to practice empathy themselves. Because to Alicia's point, they do want it, they just don't realize it, or they don't
Mhm.
understand what they're wanting.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that you know that there's a lot of us pushing to this group of people that already have an interest in understanding empathy, strengthening their empathy, but it's really the people in the second ring outside of them that might not even be paying attention right now, that are really the ones we need to reach and transform and, you know, convert with our empathy army. And how do we do that?
Correct. Yeah. How do we wake them up so that we can inform and challenge them? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that for me, through continued, every conversation that I have, whether it's a podcast, a presentation, or a one-on-one conversation, I think of that as getting the word out and spreading the word. And it might reach the ears of one of those people that can suddenly go, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And I don't know about for you guys, I find it really gratifying to hear back from people that, yeah, they did. Oh, I never thought about it that way, that it did kind of wake them up.
Right. So what I heard you say is that with every conversation you have, every podcast, every presentation, you are continuing to get the word out, to bang the drum, and you are getting response back, that you are reaching people who are saying, oh, I never thought of it that way. And so what I heard you saying is that maybe it is eventually reaching the people in that second tier, but I don't know if that's actually accurate in what you were saying.
Yes, that's kind of my hope, that
Like we're touching them.
It might be we're touching them, because if they have to go to a corporate presentation, then I'm sure everybody that was at your I don't know, I'll mispronounce it.
Christus,
the Christus
Mhm.
Foundation thing that you were talking about. Maybe not all of them were like fully bought into this, but some of them had their eyes opened and they were awakened, if you would.
right. So you don't know that necessarily everyone we're talking to is fully bought in, but you're hoping to change a few hearts and minds within that process of constantly talking about it. Yes.
Exactly.
That was the time too. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
So you're up, Maria. Choose your
Okay.
listener.
I'll choose Edwin.
Okay, listening.
So this is a really interesting conversation, because I think we are the people that are out there trying to make this change. And I find it really interesting that I think I have an assumption, at least for me, that we all sort of decided to go this route in our own silo, not knowing if there were going to be other people that supported us. And all of a sudden we found each other. And so, to Rob's point, knowing that there's a lot of other people out there, rowing in the same direction, does help us keep hope that this is something we can transform.
Mm-hmm. So you're seeing that, everybody kind of came to this value sort of on their own in their own different silos, and then starting to see that, hey, I'm not alone here. There's a lot of other people, and just thinking in terms of rowing kind of with as a group, kind of see the community aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about, in terms of like the core question of this talk today, which is how do we spread the word? I think all of us knowing where our, I don't want to say lane, because that sounds like you can't branch out, but reaching the people that we are reaching in all the different facets that we're reaching them is helpful, rather than us all going after the same audience. Like, I feel like that's more impactful. If there's all these speakers out there, but they all have different kind of specialties, that enables us to reach more people, rather than, we're all clamoring to talk to the same group of people. Does that make, I don't know if that makes sense.
You're thinking for sort of effectiveness, as everybody has their own sort of specialty that they're working on, versus all working on one same topic. That'd just be more effective. To have a full spectrum of different expertise on different topics.
And I really believe that by doing that, we figure out we're going to reach a lot more people, because one message might not resonate with CEOs, or one message might not resonate with families or children. But by by all of us trying these different messages out with these different audiences, we end up kind of we get full coverage, and then somebody can find something that resonates with them.
So you're seeing that through that specialization, someone specializes with CEOs and kind of can craft a message that speaks to them, someone else with families, maybe schools, just with in these different parts of society. And that's kind of, you see that as effective in terms of learning to craft good messages.
Right. And one of the things that I've been wanting to do that I spoke to Rob about is I want to create a community of us experts where we're actually sharing our information with each other, so that when we go out on talks, similar to what I'm doing with you, Edwin, is I'm bringing you into this world of people that may never have been exposed to you before. And same thing, like, you know, Alicia probably has different research than I have, or that Rob has, or that you have. And so it's still on my brain to try to build a community of us, maybe in the next year, where we're meeting occasionally and sharing our resources and sharing our different data points, so that we can have a more, you know, it's just, it kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It fortifies everybody by knowing, you know, if I know what you're working on, Edwin, and I know what Alicia's working on and what Rob's working on, and then I use that information and I mention them when I'm talking to other people, it becomes like a spider web. It just proliferates out. And I feel like that's how we're going to have to do the work.
Yes, you're seeing a good way to do the work is sort of the spider web metaphor. That everyone has their sort of their areas that they're specialized in. There's sort of this cross promotion to cross promote and support each other. And you have that sense of maybe community and mutual support going forward. You think that that's a more stronger, more powerful maybe way of moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like it gives us more coverage that way. But I'd be interested in hearing other people's thoughts on this talk. So
yeah, so using this approach, there you have more coverage with different parts of society, and you kind of get the message out there better. And you're curious, hey, what does everyone else think about this?
Yeah, because I know there's other empathy experts out there that are working specifically in the social impact space, and empathy experts working in using empathy as a catalyst for innovation, or using empathy as a catalyst for racial justice, or, you know, so everyone's sort of got their own flavor. And it's just, that's actually why I enjoy doing the podcast, is I can talk to all these different people and find out what they're working on. And so I think that that's a really good, for all of us, you know, again, the core question, how do we build traction for this movement? I feel like that's a great way, that's a great ground game of, like, you know, figuring out where everyone's specialty lies.
So you think it's a good ground game just to hear where everyone's specialty is. You appreciate dialogues like this, just so you can hear from other people and build that community. And some of the ground games were, or the aspects were social impact, others were design. So you're seeing a lot of the different social justice was another area. So, yeah, and that was the time too.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you, Edwin.
Great. I'll speak to Rob there to mix it up a little.
Sure.
Hit the start. Yeah, that's the reason for these activist empathy circles, is that we can come together and start connecting with each other, because it feels really good. It's just to see you all. It's like I feel very happy to see all of you.
Yeah, so you're feeling happy to see all of us, and it is a good way to bring us together, even in these initial circles.
Yeah, and I'm happy because to be with people who are others who are, you know, deeply committed to this vision of a more empathic society. You know, I don't have to make the case, you know, for it. It's more like, hey, let's just share where we are, and you know, hear kind of the struggles that you're dealing with, and the successes and possible ways of collaborating, and that kind of moves us all sort of forward, it seems like.
Yeah, so through these circles, we're not having to convince anyone of anything, but we can actually share and learn from each other and collaborate and try to move things forward.
And I think I'm also trying to promote the empathy circle as a core practice within the empathy community. because you have communities like the mindfulness, compassion communities. They're very focused on the core practice of meditation. And I think the meditation is more of an individualistic sort of a practice, like you individually, connect to yourself, which is, great for self-connection and so forth. But I see the empathy circle is more of a relational empathy practice. And I see empathy as being sort of a relational focus versus that individualistic focus.
So what I'm hearing is that you'd like to see the empathy circles become fundamental to overall empathy practice, where similar to mindfulness, it's grounded in meditation. The empathy circle is a relational piece, which is what empathy is all about. And so it makes sense that that might be a foundational element.
Yeah, and talking about foundations, the empathy circle is just sort of built on the work of Carl Rogers, who did active listening within the therapeutic world, just taking it out of the therapy and putting it into just human beings relating to each other. And here's a really good tool for that. So it's got a really solid foundation with Rogers and all the writings that he did about it.
Yeah, so the circles are a non-therapeutic evolution of Carl Rogers's work in active listening.
And then the other thing is, what can we do to really get the word out? And right now I'm focusing on developing a definition, a training, 7-week training on the definition of empathy. Like, there's all these different definitions out there, and you can't have everybody do the same definition, but I want to be really clear what I'm meaning by empathy. So developing that course is my next project.
Okay, and so you're working on a 7-week course that will define empathy and try to get everybody who's in that course to be working from that same sort of grounding of what empathy is.
Yeah, or at least I can say this is what my definition is, and you can have different takes on it, but at least we have like this basic framework.
Yeah, so it's a basic framework that's your definition of it, and then people can work off of that or understand where you're coming from.
Because there's I think the definition piece is a problem right now with all these different ways people are understanding it. The definitions are out there, but they're not in an easy to grasp format. And you have books like Against Empathy, which it sounds like it's, against what empathy is. But if you really look at it, I actually agree with the criticisms that this person has of what he's describing, because it's not empathy. What he's actually describing is something that blocks empathy. And here is all this confusion coming out of this.
Yeah, so I'll paraphrase. Well, what I was hearing you say was there's confusion that's been created through the different definitions of empathy, and then books like Against Empathy have come out, which take a potentially controversial approach that confuses people because it's going against some of the principles while making it seem like they are supporting it.
Yeah, so it's a confusing thing. So yeah, so that's my time. I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Good. Alicia.
Yes,
I
yes.
feel like this is like the game password. Like, are you ready to receive?
I know.
Where do I want to go? Yeah, there's and Edwin and I think talked about this on one of his episodes. The definition of empathy has been around in the English language since I think 1908 or 06, and it seems like for whatever reason people glommed onto it, like, oh, it's emotion, it's cognition, it's all of the things, where seen, heard, and understood can all be different things. So maybe we're better served with 3 different words. I think that would ultimately create even more confusion, however. So we're kind of stuck working with what we've got. But I think if we can get some clarity to it, that will help. And that's how I start. I'll pause in just a sec. That's how I start all of my talks, is just demystifying empathy and explaining what it is, so that people, it clears the air.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is a conversation that you had with Edwin and extracting the definition of empathy, and it came around what, 1906, 1908, and people just keep tacking on it, and then you married back my to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, and those are really three different definitions, right? And so it's really refining that and looking at that differently, so that people, because when people hear certain words, it causes a response to them.
Yeah. And I gave last week, 2 weeks ago, I gave a empathetic leadership workshop training, and somebody asked about the role that connection plays in empathy. And she ended up doing a little LinkedIn Live about it last week, but I had said that, connection is that using empathy to relate to the other person. And so an active empathy can be that actual connection point. And I thought it was an interesting, she didn't realize she was building on it, but it was an interesting kind of build to that explanation of empathy and how empathy needs to be utilized.
Yeah, so you recently did a leadership workshop, talked about connection, and in that a woman who was in the workshop, she ended up doing LinkedIn Live, pardon me, and you think it's interesting how she made a connection to the connections that you were talking about.
Yes. And I think that's another piece in this confusion around empathy, and something we can all just help continue to dispel. Empathy isn't the end point. I always talk about it as it's kind of the beginning. It's a way station on your journey, and it enables all these other skills that let you become the people that you want to be.
Empathy is essentially a way station from your perspective, and it allows you to enable all of these other skill sets. So it's sort of the beginning of the journey, if you will.
Yeah.
Definitely not the end.
Correct.
Yes.
I feel heard.
Good. Maria.
Hello.
Yes. Hello. The way that as I was listening to all of you, and like Edwin, and I know we all feel similar, it is so encouraging to be with like-minded souls, but we all know the importance of being with divergent viewpoints to basically be empathetic with those divergent viewpoints. But I think, and this is one of the things that I always talk about when I'm presenting to people, and if to be truly empathetic, we have to first start with ourselves. So we're first self-empathetic, because if we can't be self-empathetic, we can't be empathetic with anyone else. Then we end up translating that out into our homes, and then our workplaces, and then our broader communities. And so that builds in that starting to basically ripple affect the empathy movement.
So what I hear you saying is that this idea of empathy, while it's really great to be around people that are like-minded, we also all understand that empathy is about being around divergent point of views as well, so that we can really understand people. But at the root of it all, you're talking about having empathy for yourself, sort of starting at home before, meaning you in your home, so that you can be empathetic with other people, that it's got to start. It's sort of like an inside job, from what I heard you saying first, in order to allow us to be more empathetic to other people.
Yep. And when I said home, I don't know if I clarified, but I meant intrinsic.
Yeah, internal.
Yep, you got it. So and then as you, and this is going back a little bit, and it was talking about when Rob mentioned, I believe it was hearts and minds, or maybe you said it, Maria, but it was, I remember when I started on this, always being highly empathetic. And but I remember when I first started in this in 2020, and I was probably doing it for about 6 months. And my father mentioned that they put a wooden chair in his neighborhood for everyone to use. He said, "That's empathetic, right?" And I said, "Yes." So that was my first yay moment.
So when you
change.
So when you started this work back in 2020, you were figuring everything out, and then you had this experience with your father of them putting like a shared neighborhood chair in the neighborhood and him questioning you on, is that empathy? Is that empathetic? And it was your first sort of kind of thrill of seeing someone else identify
Yes.
empathy being about thinking about others and understanding what they might need.
Mhm. Yes, definitely. Especially my father. For sure, absolutely. And I really like Maria and where you came in and spoke to how, and Rob, you mentioned too, and just how, we're all in the same boat and we're all moving together in time. And quite frankly, in the early days, I would do something, and in particular, Rob, it was when I interviewed you and I was promoting your book, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, you can't promote him. He's your competitor." I said, "Rob is not my competitor. He's on this mission. He's a soldier in this empathy mission with me. I can only win by promoting him."
Thank you.
And yes, absolutely. And I could see where that could be misconstrued, but I agree with you. We are not competitors because we're all coming at it very differently. And at the end of the day, we're all unique individuals. And so the way that we deliver things is all going to be different, but yet it's that collective message of connection.
Right. So I hear you saying that, when you started and this idea of us all being on the same team, all of us out there talking about empathy, that others can perceive that as competition, but you are realizing that it's not competition because we're complementing each other and we're moving the movement forward by all focusing on our different areas of strength and our different angles that we have when we approach empathy.
Right. And I do definitely, I look at our work in particular, as something that, and probably because we're all so high in empathy, I'm not looking around going, these are my competitors at all. I'm thinking, these are my mates. These are the folks who are in the battle with me, alongside me.
So what I hear you saying is that you don't look at it as adversarial, but you're looking at it as we are all on the same team. These are your mates. These are the people on your team. They're all in it with you.
Yes, I feel heard. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do I go now? Okay. Rob, I think I picked Edwin last time, so I'll pick you,
Let's
Rob.
do it. The secret word is.
So Rob, you actually said something that got me thinking about connection. And it got me thinking about how we in this movement address for people how you can have empathy for someone you may not like. And that is actually a really hard question to answer as an expert and as just someone pondering that question. Is there, not that you have to answer this, this is my musing, is what can we as empathy experts do to help people understand that empathy can form a connection. You can find common ground with someone, even if you don't necessarily like them, even if you disagree vehemently with them or their worldview. And I think that's something I think we're not talking enough about in our empathy expert world. And selfishly, because I don't always know how to answer that. So I'll pause there.
Okay. Thank you. So you're reflecting on what had come up earlier around connection, and that we don't, there's some confusion that people have, and that we as empathy practitioners or empathy activists have around connecting, and how do you connect to somebody that you maybe don't see eye to eye with, that you might vehemently disagree with on an issue, but how do you actually connect with them? And that's something that we're not, as a community of empathy activists, we're not necessarily talking about at this point. Is that?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say in more concise language. So I liked what what you said earlier about it's not the destination, because I often talk about empathy as the fuel that makes things work, right?
Mhm.
So if an inclusive culture is your destination, the way to get there is through empathy. Empathy is going to fuel that effort, not necessarily hiring for diversity, not necessarily having a checklist, but otherwise it's just a bunch of people disagreeing with each other. And so empathy is the fuel that enables all these other desired outcomes, I guess, to take place.
Yeah, empathy, the way you talk about empathy is how it fuels the desired outcome. So if somebody's looking to create a more inclusive workplace, the empathy is the path to get there. It can fuel that journey. It's not just about a checklist or quotas or something. It's having empathy and using empathy on your way to get there.
Yeah. And I had this epiphany on the heels of my talk last week that, I think that like with any kind of new model, people are trying, workplaces and leaders are trying to make sense of like, well, how do I do this, right? How do I infuse empathy in my organization? How do I create an empathetic culture? And I actually realized the other day that no one asked that question about integrity. No one actually ever says, well, how do I foster integrity in my culture? They just know it has to be everywhere. It has to be part of how everyone operates. It has to be inherent in their policies. It has to be a way of being. And so if we can make empathy help people see that empathy is very similar to a trait of integrity. You don't have to have a chief empathy officer, just like you don't have a chief integrity officer, right? It's something that has to infuse everything and just be part of your standard operating methodology.
Right. So what I was hearing was that empathy needs to be infused into organizations the way other morals and values like integrity would be. It's not something that they should have to be consciously practicing. It's a state of being. And you shouldn't have to have a chief empathy officer, just like you shouldn't have to have a chief integrity officer. And that would probably say something about the organization if they did.
Right. Right. I feel heard. I might not be out of time, but
Okay.
this is
You had
bringing up
4
more
seconds.
questions for me.
Yeah, well, let's see, building on that. I guess
Who's your
Edwin
listener?
will be my listener.
Okay, listening.
Let me gather a thought. Yeah, I like you use the word fuel. I say it enables or empowers all of these different things. And this is kind of taking it back to even the beginning of the conversation. It is surprising how many people question like why I even need empathy, which is an indicator in and of itself.
So a lot of people are sort of asking, why do I even need empathy? And you see that sort of says something about them.
Yeah,
And I think there was another part too that you're saying that, like Maria was saying, it's a fuel that you're seeing. It does enable and it empowers. So it's a source.
Yeah. So I think we have very similar slides in our PowerPoints, but it's one of my favorite slides. But yeah, there's sorry, my brain is drifting. I use the business solver state of workplace empathy study a lot. And the latest favorite thing to talk about is how, 69% of CEOs see that their job is to create a culture of empathy, and that they play a critical role in it. But 79% of CEOs don't have a firm grasp of empathy effectively. I'm paraphrasing it slightly. And 77% of CEOs fear that they are going to be perceived as weak if they reflect empathy. And then what I go on and say is it's not just the C-suite. Like, you got to imagine they held these views and fears when they were managers and earlier in their careers. And that's what we're needing to combat and challenge and get people at all levels of an organization to see differently.
So you use the business resolver data in your talks, and what they're talking about is managers see the importance of empathy, feel that they're not empathic enough, and that you're seeing it as really a culture-wide phenomenon. You have to raise the level of empathy within the whole corporate culture versus just at the top level like that, or
sort of, yeah. I mean, the business solver study looks at the state of empathy in the workplace, and they found in their 2022 study this recognition among CEOs that it's their job to be empathetic, but an even greater fear and hesitancy about how to be empathetic, which just illustrates the challenge that we're facing. And then the point I was going on to make was that, those CEOs at one point were a director, as they moved up the ladder from CEO, they were a VP, they were a director. Before that, they were a manager. They had that same challenge and fear all the way through. So I think building on that, there is a systemic, societal wide, like all the messages that have been shared with people growing up is of what a leader should look like has not been empathetic.
Yeah, so it's you're seeing, let's see, if the problem is that the managers, they've kind of gone up the hierarchy and they've had this fear about, oh, if I am empathic, I'm going to be weak or something like that. So that's sort of moved all the way through. You're seeing that as sort of one of the challenges to address, or the problems
Yeah,
to address.
and yet what was interesting in that leadership training I gave, I asked everybody to share an example. Think of a leader that they look up to in the business world, and nobody of the 30 people in the room, no one listed a celebrity CEO or a CEO that's a name. It was all personal mentors or managers that they've had. And when I asked them, like, okay, well, what did they do that's earned them this place? Much of it was empathetic skills. They listened to me. I felt supported. I felt heard, like seen, heard, connected, supported, understood, all of that. So it's highlighting that to people, because I think as I've had conversations with clients, and I'll pause in a sec, as I've had conversations with clients, some of them have said to me, they're like, the empathetic leader is the more successful leader. It's just not the one that's newsworthy, because of and it's the unempathetic one that gets all the news attention.
Yeah, so people say that it's the unempathic leader that gets the attention, the empathic ones don't get the attention. And that when you ask business leaders, like, who do they sort of look up to as other leaders, it hasn't been big celebrity leaders. It's been people who they've personally known, that have really listened to them and heard them, and been sort of present with them. So, and that was the time too.
Yep.
Okay, Alicia, can I speak to you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, let's see, what do I have here? I think that I kind of made some notes, and one was about conflict and disconnection, be it, with people in conflict. The empathy, I think, is core to that, people maybe don't appreciate the power of empathy for bridging divides.
what I'm hearing is that you're making that connection, empathy and bridging divergent voices and bringing them together, because really a lack of empathy, it causes that chasm, and empathy bridges the divide.
Yeah, so for any organization, a high degree of empathy is going to mean that if people have the skills, they can do, on the spot, quick conflict resolution. They can head off conflicts before they happen because they have the skills, as well as when they do come up, they'll have the skills for addressing them.
Mm-hmm. And so what I'm hearing is the empathy skills, and when they have them, then they can deal with that conflict resolution and then quickly move on to probably the next conflict until there are no more conflicts.
No, it's what's his name? Johann Galtung. He does conflict resolution. He has this beautiful formula. He says, peace is resolving conflict with empathy, creativity, and nonviolence, and it's a never-ending process.
So I don't remember his name, Johann, but
Galtung, yeah.
Peace, conflict resolution.
Peace is resolving conflict.
And it's a never-ending problem.
Yes, I didn't want to add that. You're adding a little ad-libbing there.
Yes,
it is
apologies,
never-ending.
you guys.
It's never-ending.
It's a circle game.
Yeah, and you got to have those skills for that ongoing resolution. And in that vein, that's what I've tried to do with the political. Is, with our empathy tent, we set up before COVID, set up the empathy tent when there was these political left-right conflicts, and we would listen to both sides and then try to bring the sides together to listen. And we had some really successful, mediations with the sides where they would political left and right would be hugging each other at the end of it.
Mm-hmm. So what I heard is pre-COVID, you would set up the empathy tents and you would bring in the perceived two different sides, bring them together, and actually you would bridge the conflict on that. There would be a greater understanding between both sides.
And a couple of times, I'm more on the Democratic, liberal side, but I went to Republican conventions here in California. It's like, and I'd set up a little table, kind of commandeered this place and said, free listening, come and let me listen to you. And we'd kind of hand out flyers. So I think it's that aspect of sort of reaching out too, to go to the people that you're maybe not your in group or something.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is that you are Democratic liberal, but you were going to Republican conventions, setting up a table, having conversations, and bringing people together, essentially.
Yeah, it's that reaching out aspect. And the other thing is Maria had mentioned the fuel, which reminded me of a quote by Joe Biden. He says, empathy is the fuel of democracy.
Yeah. And so a quote, Joe Biden said a quote that ties back into what Maria was talking about, fuel. And I already forgot what Joe Biden said, but it said empathy. Empathy is the fuel
of democracy.
Yeah.
And Barack Obama talked endlessly about empathy, but they're not doing it in my book. It's like, if you guys, politicians, if you really want to do it, call on us. It's like, we got some processes here.
Yes, and so what I'm hearing is Barack Obama talked about empathy endlessly, and the politicians are not doing it right, and they should be calling upon us to show them how to do it right.
Yeah, and it's when I ran for office as the empathy candidate, that's the first thing I did is I reached out to the fellow candidates. I said, hey, let's have an empathy circle together on how to bridge the political divides or the social and political divides. So I think that's where it starts.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is when you recently ran for political office, one of your first things you did was to bring in all the political sides together to start to build the movement, basically from the inside out.
Yep, I feel fully heard.
Yes, good. good. So it's my turn, right? Maria, hello. Oh my goodness. Wow, this is quite an adventure. Oh my goodness. I had a million thoughts as you guys were all talking. So like Rob, I need a minute to reground myself. And it just came to me, Rob, it just triggered when I thought about Rob. So I too am doing workshops with CEOs. And like you, Robin, I'm working with small, mid-sized business CEOs. And that is one of the big questions they ask me, Alicia, how do I be empathetic without being viewed as weak?
So you're working with CEOs as well of small to mid-sized businesses, and that's a common question you hear from them is how can I be empathetic without being seen as weak?
Yep, exactly. And I think I know for me, the first time they said it, I was inside. I was like, oh, wow, because I feel it so intrinsically, and you guys probably do too. It's not something I have to really think about so much, but I am aware when I'm not empathetic. But my thought was to go really, really big and say, okay, bring forth Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Mahatma Gandhi as you know, global leaders, and do you view them as weak? And then indicate they were very high in empathy individuals, and they're not weak.
So I heard you say you found a way to combat those questions or counter those questions with getting people to think of famous leaders like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, who are known for being empathetic, and to ask them, do you think that they are weak? To get them to realize that they actually know empathetic leaders, they've seen them, and they don't think they're weak.
Right. No, not at all. And it's sort of dovetailing back to the whole celebrity aspect. And I'm thinking, I mean, a true empathy activist, I don't think that we'd ever be fame seekers, you know, not that we wouldn't mind notoriety, but that's not why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing because we're called to do this movement, to ripple this whole empathy out into the community.
So you're saying that empathy activists are not necessarily trying to build celebrity, they're just really trying to move the movement forward, although notoriety and being known is also a nice thing. It's not the main goal.
Yep, exactly. And rounding out, I will say that in my workshops with CEOs, I remind them that an entire organization, this is my experience, 26 years in corporate America, everybody's looking up to your most senior leader. And if your most senior leader isn't empathetic, nobody else is going to be empathetic. But if your most senior leader, your CEO is empathetic, that is going to trickle down into your organization.
So you talk about the fact that people should look up to their most senior leader, and that most senior leader should really be a model of empathy to show people as it trickles down that it's okay to be empathetic, that you can succeed here if you are empathetic.
Right. And in closing, empathy, I think we all know this, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of great strength, because you stand in your own power. You know who you are, and you do not mind. You don't need to steal the spotlight. You want everyone else to have a light shined on them.
And so those people who know what empathy really means understand that it's not about that you actually have to be very strong and stand in your own values to be empathetic. You don't need that spotlight on you because you'd rather shine that spotlight on other people.
Exactly. I feel heard.
Yay. Okay. I think I might have to bounce back to you, Alicia, because I think I've had Edwin and Rob as listeners. So
Okay.
is that, can I do that, Edwin? Okay, cool. So much goodness in there, Alicia. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, like I was talking about earlier, is busting those myths of what empathy means, because empathy actually requires an incredible amount of strength and confidence. And what I tell people is, otherwise you're going to take everything as an attack. If you don't have strength and confidence, you can't even make space in your brain to entertain someone else's point of view.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you agree it's a sign of great strength. And when you're standing in your own power of empathy, basically, you're not going to be viewed as someone attacking you at all. And so basically you're making space for someone else to feel the same.
Yeah, I think kind of a tweak to that is more that you don't feel attacked. You don't feel when someone presents a different point of view that they're personally attacking you. When people are low in self-esteem and low in self-confidence, they actually can't be very empathetic because they're too worried about protecting themselves.
Yeah, so when people are low in self-confidence, they're so busy protecting themselves, they basically feel attacked all the time.
Right. And there's a really great book out there. I had the author on my show, Amer Kazi. His book is called Ambitious. And he's a professor and a consultant. And he talks about the fact that he made up that word ambitious because it's about humility and ambition. And that when you combine those two, you become an extremely powerful leader. And I think, getting folks in that we're talking to think about, like to Rob's point, those leaders we look up to, we will probably, without knowing that there was a trend, realize that there's a trend there, that those people were very ambitious and also very humble and empathetic at the same time. And that's why they're a leader that we look up to.
So what I'm hearing is you had the author of Ambitious on your podcast, and the book basically bridges being humble and ambitious, and really how inspiring, paraphrasing a bit here, how inspiring that can be. Right.
I really resonate with what's been said about getting people. People seem to think they have these perceptions of they don't seem to think they have these perceptions of what an empathetic leader is, and they sometimes in those abstract perceptions think it's weak and that it's not going to benefit them. And yet when you get them to think about those leaders that they've admired most, that's when we can connect the dots for them. That why did you admire that leader? Oh, because that leader was really decisive and always, gave me projects and, supported me and really helped me be my best, all of those things. They start to realize that they actually have been exposed to positive role models of empathetic leaders. They just never put those two things together before.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is essentially people, I'm paraphrasing here a bit, when they don't realize what empathy is, they view it as weakness. And so when you start connecting dots and letting them see leaders that are actually highly empathetic, then it compels them to want to actually lead that way as well.
Yeah, I think a tweak to that is just when you get them to think about the leaders in their own lives, not the famous leaders, like Rob was saying, the leaders that they've admired in their career, they can rattle off a list of things that person did. And it turns out it's often because that person was empathetic and confident and ambitious. And it sort of like makes the light bulb go off for them.
So when you are able to connect leaders closer to people's hearts and minds, basically, instead of away from the whole celebrity leader, it starts basically, firing a synapses and letting them see all of those values that they like and they respect and admire, and gives them room to reflect that out as well.
Exactly. And the other thing, again, back to the point of the circle, which is talking about how do we proliferate the empathy movement. I think even doing, all of us out there doing more of these talks and trainings, what it does for those groups, whether it's a group of 20 or it's a group of, 300, is it gives them a common language that they can then refer back to that training or that talk as like an inside joke, right? So for example, if you go through a training and you talk about actively listening and getting curious, they can even be in a meeting where someone's talking and another person's talking over them, and be able to say, oh, remember what Maria said, we've got to ask more questions when we disagree. It gives them like a reference point to go back to that seems safer than just putting themselves out there and saying, you're talking over each other. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. And so what I'm hearing is doing things like this. This basically gives people a point of reference and essentially a safety net that it's okay because, you know, Maria was doing it in her meeting. And so I'm safe to do this in mine as well, in my relationships.
Exactly. I feel heard. Thank you. So it's actually your turn again, Alicia.
It is? Oh, man. Ooh.
Sorry.
Is it really? Okay, Edwin, I'm sorry, you guys, when this is over, I'm a slow processor. So in about 3 days, I'll be like, I get it.
So you're just saying that you're selecting me and you're saying that you're a slow processor. You have to, it's going to take you a while to process all this. And then you'll say, now I get it.
Yes, yes. And I think that we need to recognize that we all process differently and, you know, give people grace in terms of we have no idea what's going on in people's lives. And so it's on us to be fully present in the conversation as much as the other person, mainly on us.
Yeah, so it's on us to give grace to the other person and be totally present in the conversation. And have some understanding for you. We don't know what other people are going through, and just so give them some grace.
Absolutely. And my thought is, you know, rounding out is we just, you know, we've all been called to do this, as I mentioned, and shifting, you know, minds and hearts is tough work, but we are, you know, prepared to do that because we're doing it every single day and we are modeling the way.
So it's hard to shift minds and hearts and the culture, I think you're saying in general, but we're doing that, you know, every day we're working at that.
And at the end of the day, empathy is an absolute practice, and we're always in practice, and we're not always going to get it right. There are going to be days when we are not empathetic at all, but it's recognizing, I was not empathetic, and apologizing if you need to, and then moving forward.
So you're seeing empathy as maybe an intention. It's a practice that you do ongoing. You're going to fail at times, maybe not do it right, but if you have to, you just apologize and you get back and try again.
Yep, exactly. I feel heard.
Oh, okay, that was fast. Fully heard. Okay, then.
Fully heard.
Wow. Okay, I'll speak to Rob then next. Yeah, I was just thinking how to bring it back to the empathy, you know, building the movement part. And I really resonated with Maria. She used the word a way of being. And I think that's what empathy is for me. And I've been really focusing on that. Is it's a way of being in the world. It's a whole body way of, you know, of being.
So you're reflecting back on how all this comes back to building the community, and what you're realizing is that it is, as Maria had said, it's about a way of being.
And a way of being is like a set of values. It's like a set of values that I have, that, you know, a family has, that the community has, that the country has. I think we're trying to shift that, you know, that larger way of being of society.
So it's really around values, and how do we shift society's values toward being empathetic.
And, you know, ourselves too, right?
Starting with ourselves.
I think Alicia was saying it, it's like, you know, I have the intention of being empathic, this empathic way of being. I get in fights with my partner, you know, I get off track, but it's like, I got the intention, you know, I'm going to come back to it, you know.
So it's the intention of doing it, recognizing, having grace with yourself that sometimes you get off track, but being able to come back to that true north, if you would.
Yeah, and that set of values is, I think it starts with empathy, being empathic to self, others, but also that mutuality. And I think that's the thing that kind of gets lost, especially what I was hearing like in the business world. People are saying, oh, I've got to do all the, as a leader or boss, I got to do all the empathy, I got to do all the listening, and then I'm going to just be a weakling, you know, because everybody's just going to walk all over me. But it's really that mutuality that, you know, the way of being is a mutual empathic presence. So it's like advocating and working towards holding that.
So it's helping people understand that this is a way of being. It's not that you're going to just become a weakling, but it's the mutuality of it and the dynamic interaction between two people.
And more, a family or just any number of people. It's the relationship and the nature. It's almost like a, you know, like the Constitution, like, hey, we're going to have a relationship. Can we agree that it's going to be a mutually empathic relationship, which means that we're just going to fully listen to each other.
So it's like we need to be agreeing to have a mutually empathic relationship, whether it's you know, with one other person, a family, or other groups that we were interacting with.
Yeah, so that's what I'm kind of working on, is the way of being aspect, and sort of mapping that out and explaining it. And then, you know, a piece of that is that, you know, if you're in a work environment, and I was just building on what Maria said, that, you know, people take in some of what you've said in a work environment, that in the work environment, somebody says something, instead of kind of lashing back, you can say, oh, I hear you saying this. Am I hearing you correctly? So you start doing what we're practicing here, is you start developing that mindset of fully hearing someone to their satisfaction. And then you share your point too, you know.
So yeah, using Maria's example, and in those work environments, encouraging people to be doing effectively an empathy circle, sharing their point of view, and then making sure that it's reflected back properly before you share your perspective.
And I see that what we're doing here, we're sort of, instead of talking about, we're talking about empathy sort of at a, you know, conceptual level, but we're also practicing it. So we're doing it at both the levels. And I think that's the power here. Instead of just giving a lecture, that we're really practicing, you know, listening to each other. So we're really modeling it here in this process.
So for everyone watching at home, we are practicing what we preach, and we're using empathy. But we're demonstrating empathy skills and empathy tools, the empathy circle, in order to reach a place of empathy with each other on this particular topic that we're discussing.
And there's something magical if people can just fully hear each other. It's like, and you just keep going back. I fully hear you, you fully hear me. And even if we have a conflict, it slowly starts taking the conflict apart. And then you start getting to the deeper levels. You say, oh, I really understand where you're coming from. And oh, I understand where you're coming from. It melts away the conflict and the stress. And then it's like, well, what do we do now? And then you just continue the discussion, like, you know, planning, coming to a mutual agreement about next steps.
So yeah, it's peeling away the layers of conflict that we may have, and so you get to a place of understanding, so that once there is no conflict, you're able to go, okay, well, what do we do about this? And what's next?
Yeah, and then you can empathically negotiate your next steps together. And yeah, so I just see that as a core. It's almost like it's almost the center for me, the center, the core of what, so the benefits, power of empathy.
So this is really the central, or the core of the power of empathy, is that empathetic negotiation that it enables when you peel everything away.
And it's also the part, if somebody's in need of support, right? If somebody's like really dealing with depression, alienation, you know, anger, whatever, if you can just listen to them, they might not have the capacity to reflect back what you're saying. But as a starting point, you can just listen to them to the point where they start calming down and start getting to the point where they can then transition to be listening to you. And that's what I try to do in those kind of situations, to always move it from maybe me just listening to moving it into a mutual empathy.
So when you're having conversations with somebody who might be in distress of some sort, you are listening to them and using these tools to help them possibly lower the level of distress that they're at, so that you can then work with them to move forward.
Yeah, my time's up. I'll say it's not just a tool, but it's again that way of being. That it's a combination of tools and a way of being.
So it's a combination of tools, a tool, and really at its heart, a way of being.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Great. Maria, I have a what if for the group and the broader group as well, empathy activists everywhere.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about, and then very common issue for all of us is that misunderstanding and the demystifying of empathy. So my what if, everybody that we all are knowing that have some social media presence, publication, podcast, whatever, what if we chose a week a few months from now and we dedicated that week to demystifying empathy? And we can all come at it from our slightly different perspectives, but we really take some time to lay out that foundation.
So your idea, your what if, is what if all of us empathy activists out there had a concentrated week where on our various platforms, social media, podcasts, whatever, we actually dedicated it to demystifying empathy.
Yes, that's correct. So whether it's a newsletter or a podcast, what, all the things that we're doing, but we're all synchronized. And then that, I think, would have the effect of magnifying the message, because we probably have some overlap and people need to hear things multiple times for it to resonate.
So you feel like that's a really great way to amplify the message, because if all of us with all our various audiences and mechanisms for reaching them all concentrated it within a given week, so it was thematic, it could have a really powerful impact.
Yes, I feel heard.
I love that idea.
Oh, that's
I
good.
was to say that. So Edwin, I will choose you, and then I
Okay.
may have to run not too soon after this, so just giving you fair warning.
Okay.
One of the things that actually you said, I think it was you, Edwin, maybe it was Rob, this idea of reaching people who, if you're in an exchange of two people and one person is being empathetic and the other person isn't, just by them modeling the behavior of listening and trying to pull a person out of distress, can be helpful in showing how empathy can be powerful. And I'm going to pause there.
Oh, yeah. So I was sharing about just listening to someone in distress and listening to them, that when you do that, you're modeling empathy, and
Right.
that's powerful to model it.
Yes. And it got me thinking about something that I try to talk about in my talks as well. And just want to share this out there in case anyone can use this, is I often get the question, well, I'm really empathetic, but I'm dealing with someone or a boss or a colleague who's not. So how do I handle that? And my answer is always that it's not your job to make the other person empathetic. It's your job to be empathetic in the exchange and be the model, so that even in their anger or disagreement or stress, they're seeing you operate with empathy, and it may show them how the exchange should go. And so you are actually modeling it for them in that exchange, whether they respond with empathy in the moment or not.
So if people talk to you about, I'm with people who are very unempathic, and your suggestion is that they model empathy and show it in the hope that that'll sort of impact the other.
Right, because I think also when we go in those exchanges and you have someone who's really empathetic and someone who's not really empathetic, they may not show it in the moment, but they walk away realizing they may have behaved badly, or that the other person was being really gracious with them. And so you are actually impacting someone without saying, hey, you need to be more empathetic with me, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so instead of telling people, hey, you're not empathic enough, you should be more empathic, that you actually model being empathic to them. And even though it might not solve the problem in the moment, that they're going to take that away and it'll sort of impact them sort of,
Exactly.
when they're thinking about it later.
Exactly. And also, you just gave me this thought. We have people that say empathic and people that say empathetic. And when I was asked about that, when I wrote the book, since I was trying to reach a business audience, I felt like they were going to tune out if I said empathic, because there's a perception that empathic means woo-woo and like you're spiritual and you're like dealing with crystals and like all this kind of stuff. Whereas if you say empathetic, even whether it means the same thing or not, I actually don't really care. It's just about opening their ears so that they're like, oh, okay, I can try to, I don't know about this empathic stuff, about being able to read people or predict the future or whatever, but I could get on board with this empathetic stuff.
So you found that people had more resistance to the word empathic. They thought it was woo-woo kind of stuff, whereas empathetic, it was maybe more about them and how they were, is it? And then they could get on board.
It just
with
seemed
that?
less woo-woo
Okay.
for people. Like they were able to at least open their ears and hear the message versus immediately shutting down if you say, I'm going to talk to you today about how to be more empathic, right? So it was actually for, and that's again kind of how to proliferate the movement. I think us even being empathetic to our audiences and meeting them where they are, sometimes you have to tweak your language a little bit so that people will be more receptive to the message. And then that ultimately is very empathetic.
Yeah, you want to being empathic is to really tweak your language in a way that people will understand. And that's, this is just one example of doing that.
Right. And also the other thing that strikes me about what's been helpful to spread the message, and I'd be curious to hear what other people think about this, is tying it back to emotional intelligence. So even though we know empathy is just one piece of emotional intelligence, being able to broaden the conversation about this is sort of one skill in your emotional intelligence toolbox. And because I get that question a lot, like, what's the difference between empathy and emotional intelligence? And I tell them it's a facet of emotional intelligence because it's the ability to see, hear, and understand people, to Alicia's point of view.
So you're looking how to tie this in with other, groups or whatever, and there's the emotional intelligence concept, and people asking you about what's the relationship, and you're trying to create a explanation of it, saying that empathy is a facet of that. And I think that's a way for you to connect with the emotional intelligence community.
Yeah, I think it helps us broaden our message. And then just the last thing is more of a open-ended question that, as I mentioned, and I talked to Rob about this, about starting this community of us empathy experts and us getting together on a monthly basis. Sometimes I feel like at some point, empathy, the word like empathy experts, even just the word empathy experts, is going to be too confining. And it often makes me think about what is it we're actually trying to say? Like, what is it? And that's why I try to latch onto emotional intelligence sometimes, because I feel like that's more broad in case, my fear, empathy falls out as a trend. Like, what's the broader story? This is the marketer in me. What's the broader story we're telling that can be have more sustainability going forward? And I don't know the answer yet. Otherwise I'd be like, yes, it's the blah community of whatever we're calling ourselves.
Yes, you're really looking at how to make this message kind of more appealing and more sustainable, and how do you sort of tweak the language, and you don't have the answer to it, but you're just sort of trying different things, maybe saying that it's part of emotional intelligence, and that'll give it more sort of acceptance. And so you're just putting it out there. Hey, I'm kind of curious what would really work in a sense. And that was the time to.
Thanks. Thank you. I feel heard, Edwin.
Okay. Well, I'll speak back to you then to keep you present.
Okay.
If you're okay with it, you got.
Yeah,
things
I've
like
probably
3.
got about 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll use that
Awesome,
time here.
thank you.
We'll listen to you and then maybe we'll open, if you listen, then
Yes.
we'll open it up to general, well, we could do that now, just open it to general discussion without reflection,
Yeah.
if you want. So, yeah, let's just open it up then, without reflection. So how was this for you? And I will say, I love the idea, Rob, about doing the misconceptions, something around that I think could be pretty good. So yeah, it's great
Thank you.
to connect with all of you.
Rob, I would love to offline that with you and we can figure out how to that could be like a great launch to this expert community of that we talked about maybe working together on. So yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. Done.
Great idea.
So Alicia, how was this for you, the empathy circle? I'd sent out the instructions for how it works. Sounds like you hadn't looked at it, but you picked it up really fast. So.
I admit, you guys, I did not. And in part, truly, when I talk to people and Rob and Ed, and when you know this, I generally, when I'm filming Solidaris, it's a high level idea. We have it's always empathy based, but there's some topic that we extract. But I like it to be pretty loose because my whole thing is we're at a kitchen table, we're having a conversation, and we all know at the kitchen table, it's not scripted. And so I'm ready for anything. So admittedly, Edwin, I did not do my homework. Shame on me. I thought, we're just going to go in and have a conversation because I don't know about you guys, but I've been a part of things like this, not with empathy activists per se, but on panels, and it is very, very scripted. And so I do like the free flowing. Admittedly, it did take me a while. I'm like, okay, I get it. But it definitely, I noticed fatigue for myself, and this is on me. I could feel my fatigue setting in, and I was hearing certain things, but I definitely wasn't mirroring back to you guys wholly. I really noticed that. And that's on me. But at the end of the day, I think this is extraordinary, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of all this. So thank you guys for allowing me to be part of the panel.
And Alicia, I went through Edwin's training and it was painful in the best way, because I'm like you, I do conversations back and forth. I want to somebody say something, somebody respond. And it was like isolating. I told Edwin that this is a great description, and it's actually, whether you use this, Edwin, or not, I describe it as a training to help you isolate your active listening muscle to the point that it burns.
Well, I'm the same way, because I'm so curious, and I mean, everything you guys were saying, I had questions I want to ask, and then
Me too, yeah.
I can't do that. This is hard, Edwin. So yes.
Yeah, Rob, how was it for you?
Yeah, it was good. It was my first time doing an empathy circle, but I as a researcher, a qualitative moderator, that's what we have to do, is really listen and actively listen. We don't always parrot back or reflect back what we've heard, but you do need to do that because it's necessary to get to empathy. So so I enjoyed it. It was hard though, because it's like, I've got to look, what are the key words that are being said here, and the thought and everything. But I enjoyed it. And yeah, I had that what if, I forget how many rounds. I was like, ooh, I've got to remember that when it gets back to me, I'm gonna hold on to that thought.
Awesome.
But I enjoyed it. There was some really good thought here in conversation. And yeah, Maria, I'd be happy to offline that, and we can use this to springboard something.
Yeah.
Well, that is kind of the benefit of the practice and the listening. It's core to the therapeutic world for for counselors, listening to people. I mean, everything from people in distress to being on the verge of suicide too. Suicide prevention listeners, they're just listening, and it's that sense of, hey, I'm in connection with someone. So this is such a foundational skill. And I think the empathy circle, it's also, you can pick it up quite quickly. So, you can read a little bit about it, but if somebody kind of explains it, for most people, they pick it up quite quickly if they see it modeled a little bit. And
I do have to put a plug in for you, Edwin, though, because the training is excellent. It helps you deal with people who could make things difficult, people that want to run rogue and not follow the rules. Like there's a lot of great role playing that's done in the training that Edwin offers to help you facilitate something like this and kind of deal with every foreseeable issue that you might encounter.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful too.
Yeah. It's on my to-do list, as I've told everybody.
It's a commitment, but yeah, it's
I look forward to being able to do it. I had one question for Maria and Alicia. Another thing that I've noticed in my talks and whatnot, I'm getting a lot of empaths and highly sensitive people attending. It makes sense that they're drawn to it. How are you when those people appear? How are you talking with them differently or within the context of, because it comes naturally. So it's not.
And I'll just jump in. I mean, I feel like it very much like I feel with you guys. I feel like I'm with my soul group right now. And so I generally, in my whole, and going back to Maria, I'm very much a conversationalist and I always have questions. So that was a big challenge for me in this. But I do the same thing when I do have people who are very high in empathy that come around to whatever I'm doing. And I just engage in that back and forth. But ultimately, I feel like we all are grounded, really rooted in the same concept. And that, for me anyway, is to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. And the fact that we all understand it.
Yeah, and I will say, Rob, I get most of the interaction I get with folks that self-assessed, self-described empaths in my trainings is they have a lot of questions about boundary setting.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, I have the opposite problem in that everyone takes advantage of me because I care and I end up taking on everyone's worries and stress and whatever. And so I talk a lot about, like I mentioned earlier, that boundaries and empathy can coexist and you just need to be really clear with your boundaries. There was a woman I had on the podcast. I recorded her a few weeks ago. She's not going to be on for a few weeks. And she actually does empathy for wellness practitioners like that. We were talking about all having our own audiences. And she is a functional nutritionist. So she helps train other wellness practitioners. And she talks about empathy. And she had this model that wasn't necessarily designed for boundary setting, but when she presented it, I was like, that model could apply to boundary setting. The acronym is ART, and I'm gonna embarrass myself because I can't remember. The first one is assess, and I can't remember what the R and T stand for, but she meant it for a different use. And I told her, you should go out in your talks and be talking about that in terms of helping your wellness practitioners who are often very natural empaths to set their boundaries. But it was a model. I'll find it and I'll send it to everyone. Because she sent me some literature on it. And it's, like I said, it's geared towards diagnosing health issues. But if you follow the steps in terms of setting boundaries for yourself as an empath, it's actually quite useful.
Yeah.
So that's what I get in my talks is people going, but I'm already an empath and my life's miserable and like,
I
burnt out.
add something.
Please. I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, is that I think, again, that's what I hear that with empaths. It's like, hey, I'm a doormat, all the emotions are coming at me. And so I really agree with the boundary setting. But the empathy circle is a boundary structure.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, this is one of the healthiest things, if you're an empath, is to learn that it's not you just doing all the listening, you taking on what everyone else is saying, that you are other people, you have 3 other people at least who are listening to you. So you're sort of the center of it and of the, when it's your turn to talk. And there's also a sense of loss of sense of identity, a loss of self that can happen with an empath. Like, it's like all these feelings, I don't know which is mine, which is the other person. But when you do the empathy circle, it's like, oh, I hear you say this is your thing. Is that right? So you're saying that this is your thing, this is your thing, this is your emotion, this is your emotion. So you're learning not to take it on as sort of a merging sense. So the empathy circle, I think, is one of the best practices for.
Well, and it takes,
Yeah.
and it takes it to a little bit more of a cognitive place than
Yeah.
the feeling of the feelings. This is all really helpful. I will incorporate some of this. I've
Well-
talked a little bit about boundaries. I tend to talk about the self-care piece
Yes.
of it, which is like, don't let the energy sit within you. You've got to take what you need from it, but then let it pass through. And I always recognize the superpower that these individuals have, and it's a gift. But
Right.
it's learning how to control that gift and use it as it.
For good rather than evil. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also I think the other thing too is I actually just did a post about this like 2 weeks ago, where people claim they're empaths, but they actually use that as an excuse for bad behavior. They use it as an excuse to just, well, I just feel what I feel when I'm feeling it because I'm empathic. So, I'm going to be really rude to you in this moment, and it's totally okay because I'm an empath. I've actually found people that will use that as an excuse because
Really?
they're very
Oh my God.
direct.
I haven't heard that one
emotional.
either. Wow.
Yeah,
you're
so
not
I wrote
an
a whole thing about
empath.
I've
that's
heard
not
it.
empathy.
Yeah.
That's just rude.
That's just rude. Yeah, exactly. And so I wrote a whole post about this. But I think also it kind of goes back to something we said before, which is making sure people understand what empathy means. And the people that are giving so much of themselves to please other people and calling it empathy, that's submission.
Yeah.
That's not empathy. And so again, bringing people back to empathy is, I see your point of view, but I stand firm in my own presence, values, boundaries,
Feelings.
Yeah. So again, I think that's going to be a constant battle for us for a while until people really understand what empathy means.
Yeah.
Well, and I will just add, and feel free to, not agree, but I do feel like, Maria, what you were saying about people pleasers, essentially, to me, it comes down to, that's about me, right? You're pleasing
Their
people,
self-identity.
filling
Yeah.
me, and I'm like, that's really narcissism, actually. So the opposite of empathy.
Yeah. Totally agree.
I'm going
Oh
to
my
keep
gosh,
bringing it back to the empathy circle real quick, and then we can
Yes.
close.
Yes.
Is that in the empathy circle, you're free to say anything and express any feeling. So you can, it's totally, you can go into grief, you can go into anger, you can do whatever. And the person will say, well, I hear you feeling angry, you're feeling grief. And they might even sense it. But it does create that self-other sort of distinction. And there's a healthiness to having that free speech, but just being reflected with that. So
without judgment.
yeah, without judgment. And then you can say, well, I think you're full of shit, and then the person, I hear you think I'm full of shit, so.
Edwin, one thing I did when I was talking about you and your empathy circles in my last talk was just as an example, I pointed to someone in the crowd and I said, it's about reflecting back what you hear without any judgment. It's like, so Alicia, what I hear you saying is that the sky is purple and trees have black leaves and we live on a trampoline. Is that what I hear you saying? And just It gets them laughing, but it gets them realizing what it means to say something that you don't agree, reflect back something you don't agree with without condoning it.
Yeah,
right?
Reflect back judgments, throw some really harsh judgments at them, and they say, oh, I hear you think I'm an idiot, I'm no good. Is there more? Tell me more.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Right, Rob?
Oh.
Well, okay, we got a time crunch here. I know you got to go, Maria. It was really
All
great.
right.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
guys.
So,
Take care.
bye.
Bye.
Can we
Alicia, great
continue?
meeting you.
You too. Bye, Al. So Edwin, it's over.
Oh.
We're done.
Let me, yeah, we're done. Let me just stop the recording.